We are extremely honored to be hosting tonight's program on adult parent-child relationships, which is something I'm sure we all deal with Dr. Gabor Maté and Daniel Maté. Renowned around the world, Dr. Gabor Maté is highly sought-after speaker and best-selling author on a range of topics, including addiction, stress, and childhood development. Dr. Maté is the co-founder of Compassion for Addiction and also advisor of Drugs Over Dinner. He has over 30 years of family practice and palliative care and has written several best-selling books. Today, Dr. Maté is also accompanied by his son, Daniel, who is an award-winning composer, lyricist, and educator. Daniel has designed and led workshops on self-discovery for songwriting for young people and adults in inner-city schools and recovery homes from Brooklyn to central Los Angeles. He has also narrated audiobook versions of 3 of his father's best-selling books. Daniel is currently the composer-lyricist in residence for Touchstone Theatre here in Vancouver. So please join me in a warm welcome to our presenters.
Okay. Well, here we are. This is both very real and a little bit surreal. I'm very honored to be here with my father, and thank you all for being here. As Loretta mentioned, my name is Daniel, and my father is, in fact, Dr. Gabor Maté. And with that, I've basically given you the entire list of my qualifications to speak on this topic. I'm kidding, of course, but I'm also not kidding. Because as you can imagine, indeed, as you can imagine, being Gabor Maté's eldest son has given me sort of a unique road to the grown-up adult parent-child relationship. And, you know, I'm going to be honest with you, it's actually been a mixed bag. On the one hand, I'm very aware that I'm very fortunate to have a father who is so willing to look at himself. I know that that's not necessarily always the norm in families where parents are willing to take a look at what might have happened early in a child's life and to take responsibility and to admit, much less as publicly and in print as my father does, the places where things might have, I don't know what the word is, gone wrong. That's not the word he would use, but maybe not gone the way we would have hoped they would have. And it's been truly very helpful to have a father who's so reflective and so contrite when it comes to looking at himself. At the same time, I have to admit, sometimes I've wished secretly, in sort of a thought experiment kind of way, that I could have just grown up in a normal screwed up family and become a normal screwed up adult and gotten into adulthood sort of blissfully, mostly unaware of a lot of the inner workings of these dynamics, and then been propelled in adulthood either by difficulties or struggles with addiction or just general curiosity to explore myself. And maybe I would have ended up at a bookstore like Banyan, and maybe I would have ended up in the self-help section, and I would have picked a book off the shelf by maybe Dr. Gabor Maté. And I could have learned there about the impact of early childhood environment. And as it was the case, that wasn't how it happened for me. Quite early on, I had parents, and particularly a father, who explained to me that my early environment was influential on my personality and my development. Which, like I said, in a sense is liberating, but when you're 8 years old and you come home from school with some of the normal social difficulties you'd expect a sensitive, myopic, uncoordinated, hyperverbal boy growing up in the mid-'80s to have, and you're upset because people called you names, it may be not, well, what I got was basically, Daniel, let me explain that when you were young, I was full of rage from my own unintegrated trauma from my infancy in the Budapest ghetto, and your mother also carried wounds from her childhood, and she and I, of course, were psychologically fused, so there was a lot of triangulation between the three of us. And that affected your brain development, which is why you have trouble reading social cues, which in turn is why people shy away from you or make fun of you at school. What would you like for dinner? And, part of me understood what he was talking about, because I had a precocious little mind. I was a smart little kid. But smart and mature are not the same thing. And on top of or underneath my smarts, there was a lot of confusion. And as kids, and this is no one's fault, this is just how it is. In fact, nothing we're going to say here tonight or tomorrow is anybody's fault. Let's just say that right out of the way. This is not a workshop about blame or fault. But kids don't necessarily get the message in the words. They get the message energetically. They get the message under the words. And the message I got, in some ways, was, Daniel, you are our mistake. You are our fault. The struggles you're having now are the result of us. So basically, if I was a number that could be reduced down to its lowest common denominator, that lowest common denominator would be my parents. Now, they never said that, but I developed a sense of myself that was very fused, very tied up with them. I forgot my water over there, and if I don't go get it now, I'm going to regret it. Maybe. Oh, thanks, Dad. Thanks, Pop. Carrying water for me as usual. So it's been a mixed bag, and it's been a unique road to get to a place where I feel like I can be in a grown-up relationship with my father, and by extension, be in a grown-up relationship with myself. I think it's the case that until we really get complete with our parents, whatever that looks like, whatever that means for us, whether they're alive or dead, whether we're even in relationship with them or not, but until we sort out this relationship we have with these formative figures in our lives, there's some part of us that stays ungrown up. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, I'm a songwriter, and I want to tell you about my journey along this road to a grown-up relationship with my parents through 3 song lyrics from throughout my lifespan, which I think will act as sort of mile markers. The first one comes from when I was 15 years old, and I'm in grade 10 at Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School. Any Churchill grads here? No? Okay. And I'm in English class, and we have a poetry assignment. And I don't remember if there was a specific prompt or a certain topic we had to write on, but we had to bring in a piece of original poetry and recite it in front of the class. And so when it came to be my turn, I stood up at the front of the room, and I delivered my poem. And part of it went like this. Dear mother, dear father, what is this hell you have put me through? Believer, deceiver, day in, day out, live my life through you. Pushed onto me what's wrong or right, hidden from this thing that they call life. Dear mother, dear father, every thought I'd think you'd disapprove, curator, dictator, always censoring my every move. Children are seen but are not heard, tear out everything inspired. Dear mother, dear father, you clipped my wings before I learned to fly. Unspoiled, unspoken, I've outgrown that fucking lullaby. Same thing I've always heard from you. Do as I say, not as I do. And it went on, and then it was over, and the teacher, I think, was either impressed or freaked the hell out. For all I know, she went and called Child and Family Services on her next break. And the class was divided roughly into 2 equal camps. Half of them were bored stiff, as they were by everything. The other half was my friends, and they were snickering. Not because they were insensitive, but because they knew full well, as I did, that I had just passed off a Metallica song as my own poetry in class. Now, why did I do it? Why did I commit plagiarism? Well, partly just to be a shit. I was in a cheeky stage of my education. This is before I started really applying myself and enjoying school. But my choice of song, the choice of which song to plagiarize was not random, it was not coincidental. The song is written by Metallica's rhythm guitarist and lead singer James Hetfield, who grew up in a family of Christian Scientists. Later, he famously had some battles with addiction and rehabilitation, which are chronicled in a really amazing documentary. But, I didn't grow up in a Christian Scientist family, not even a Christian family, but I related to this character. Something about the rigidity of the environment, the sense of not getting the emotional nourishment that the child is craving. Even if there's love there, it's not love that's digestible on some level. And I also just really related to the emotional mix of the song. Because on the one hand, it's angry, it's bitter, it's spiteful, almost a little vengeful. On the other hand, it's just a cry for love. It's a plea for acceptance, and it's a lament for spoiled potential. And he even, this character, he sees everything. He sees his parents' pain, and he even sees how his parents' pain has left a mark on him. The final line of the song is, I'm living out this hell you always knew, which could have been lifted from a chapter on multi-generational trauma from a Dr. Gabor Maté book. So I related to it on some deep level. Now, on the surface, my parents and I had a great relationship when I was a teenager. I told them everything. I wasn't a rebellious kid at all. But something about me just really resonated with the rage and the impotent upset of this character, because he's completely powerless to change anything. So let's fast forward 10 years. Now I'm 25 years old. It's the year 2000. And I'm in Vancouver after completing my undergrad at McGill. And I'm recording a solo album. I'm now a singer-songwriter. I now play guitar. And my biggest hero, my biggest influence is Ani DeFranco. I just love the way Ani can put her life into songs in this candid way and just tell it like it is and admit to her vulnerabilities, but also just put people in their place when they cross her, Now, she lives a more interesting life than me. She's living a bohemian, sort of polyamorous life in the East Village of New York City, whereas I'm living in my parents' basement in Vancouver. But, write what you know. So, one song on the album goes like this. This is it. I'm cutting my own cord. My time with you has been a double-edged sword. I don't know what you mean to me now, but of this fact I am sure, that you were my disease and I can't let you be the cure. I'm under no obligation to reveal myself to you. My days of full unquestioning disclosure are through. It's catchy, right? You can call it love, you can call it concern, you can say you want to be my friend, but I'm telling you to back off now and give me time to mend. And no, I don't have an explanation. This is something that I never planned. But this symbiotic incest of emotion, it just got out of hand. And there are things about me that you will never know, you'll never understand, and I will not be truly free until you give me time to be my own man. That's the name of the song, My Own Man. It kind of sounds like the kid from the Metallica song grew up and went to therapy, maybe with Gabor Maté himself. Well, a few things to note about that song. Like I said, I was living in my parents' basement when I wrote it, so I was inherently ambivalent about this whole business of actually separating from them. I talked a good game, and it sounds like this very definitive emancipation declaration. But I wasn't estranged from them at all. I saw them every day. The other thing that really stands out to me, and I'm impressed by the candor and honesty of the song, and the guitar playing on it is phenomenal. And in fact, there are CDs for sale for pennies. You can just pay me $2. These are old CDs that have been sitting in boxes in my parents' basement for 15 years. So if you'd like to take some home with you. But what strikes me about the song is the chorus. There's a fatal flaw in the logic. It says, I said, I will not be truly free until you give me time to be my own man. I will not be free until you make me free. At age 25. That's how I felt. That was how I saw things. But it's this ironic thing of wanting to be empowered, but really dreading taking the responsibility that really is what makes true power possible. You know that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility? Well, the flip side is also true. With no power comes no responsibility, which is pretty appealing on some level. It's actually tempting to stay in old dynamics if I don't need to take responsibility for myself. And it wasn't until a couple of years later, when something really jolted me out of that, and I saw the absurdity of that I started really questioning and seeing that my parents were never going to free me because they couldn't. It's not their job. And even if they keep themselves on the hook for why I am the way I am, and even if they worry about me and they lament and regret what might have happened when I was younger, it's my choice whether to use that or not. It's my choice whether to move on or not, and to be my own man or not. So fast forward another 10 years, and this is the final song I want to share with you. Now I'm living in New York City, and I'm a musical theater writer. And it's actually a big relief to be writing musical theater songs, because instead of having to write these earnest, angry guitar songs about myself and singing about myself and having it be so literal, I can put my thoughts and ideas in the mouths of characters. I can make up all kinds of crazy people to sing my thoughts. And then I can give them to really skilled singing actors to perform them. So it lightened things up considerably. And I wrote this one song about called When I Get Enlightened, about a woman who's standing at a sign-up table, perhaps very much like the Hollyhock sign-up table for maybe a Hollyhock program, something new age or self-help oriented. And she's skeptical. And so she asks some questions. She says, when I get enlightened, will I have to change my name to something Tibetan? I think that might threaten my mom's deep sense of Jewish pride. And of course, she's just being difficult, That's not really her question. And she goes on and she says, when I get enlightened, will I have to drop the snark and talk all new agey? I like being cagey, and I'm quite fond of my impenetrable wall of words. It suits me. And then this goes on for a bit, and then finally she pauses and she asks a question that's a little closer to the bone. She says, when I get enlightened, can I still resent my dad? Not will I, but can I? And then she says, oh yeah, and then there's my mother. I guess I'll have to rethink her too, after all the bullshit she's put me through. But then she hits upon something. She says, I guess I'll be pure. I guess I'll be wise. Excuse me, it's the other way around. I guess I'll be calm. I guess I'll be pure. I guess I'll be way too fucking secure to even take the bait, because I'll be on my cloud, not a single muscle tightened. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. Guess what? I got enlightened. And this sort of turns into a this. And that was my way of parodying some of the stuff I noticed going on in me, this sort of, again, wanting to move forward without really wanting, with the fear of change and the fear of moving into a more adult relationship. And bringing that sense of humor to it, bringing that awareness of my own tendency to keep things exactly as they are, even as I'm complaining about the way they are, has really helped lighten things between me and my parents. It's no longer up to them to free me. Anytime I'm hooked, anytime I'm upset with them, ultimately, there may be things to communicate, there may be conversations to have, but ultimately, it's going to be up to me whether or not I'm my own man or not. And so, like I said at the start, not everyone can be Gabor Maté's kid. There's only 3 of us on the planet, and I'm only speaking for myself tonight. And I know that my experience is, in some ways, unique, but my hope for everyone who's here tonight and here this weekend is that you'll hear something and you'll see something new about your own situation that helps you, both of you, whether you're the parent or the child, get to know each other newly as your own people. And I'll also just say it's never done. I don't think my dad and I are up here professing to have any perfect solution or any kind of truth. But what we can help people do, what we do all the time, is to try and sift through what's untrue and to pull that away and make space for something new. Thanks for listening.
Well, I'd like to present the case for the defense now. You know, Byron Katie, some of you know her work. And it's all about taking responsibility for one's own responses or reactions to the world. And she's talking to this young guy who, on stage, you know, in front of an audience, and she's doing her method, her work. She calls it the work. And this young guy, late teens, maybe early 20s, says something like, every time I see my family, they tell me what to do and how I should live my life and what's wrong with how I'm doing things and how I could be better. And how can I get them to stop? And Byron Katie says to him, my friend, what planet are you living on? That's just what parents do, period. And the question that, of course, the trouble is she's right. Parents do that a lot, and I've done that a lot. The question really is, well, really the most moving, the most moved moment of my life was Daniel's birth. After 36 hours of labor, I think, and some last-minute concerns, and a forceps delivery, out comes this little creature with blue hands and blue feet, little spaceman. And I just began to cry, which I don't easily do except at bad movies. And the question for all of us as parents is, well, how do we go from that moment of, well, you know, I've had this thought. I used to work just a block away from here with a highly addicted population, street people. And I'd look at a human being sometimes whose external appearance and life circumstances and behaviors are all disturbed and disturbing. And I couldn't help but think sometimes, every single one of you, every single one of them, every single one of us probably began life in a moment of excitement and possibility. Not everybody, but most people. And how does it happen that out of this love, on some level, new life is brought into the world, and parents have nothing but good intentions. They really do have nothing but good intentions. And already a year later, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, or 30 years later, there's anger between the child and the parent. There is resentment. There's fear. There is constantly aggravated hurt. There's this deep desire for connection and love, and yet what often ends up happening is miscommunication, feelings being ruffled. Just how does that happen? And it has something to do with, I think, with the difficulty of seeing the other, of actually seeing the other. And this is not unique to children and parents. We just have trouble seeing one another for who we actually are in the present moment. We carry such an overlay of past experience and expectation and fear and need into any relationship. And we do that in our relationship with the children as well. And that stays with us even long after the kids have actually grown up. I'll share with you a few incidents from Dan's life. And I don't do so. I've been forbidden by my children to have any more guilt. Okay, it's It's verboten. Or self-flagellation or any of that kind of stuff. And by the way, it may seem like you're listening to a very unique family story. Tolstoy, in the beginning of his great novel, Anna Karenina, makes this famous statement that all happy families are alike, but each unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. And actually, he blew that one. Actually, unhappy families are very similar. The drama may look different. The roles may seem different. The costumes may seem different. But the dynamics, they're the same. And they have to do with needs unmet. And they have to do with the difficulty we all have in being in the present moment with the other person who's also in the present moment. Which is to say, we project onto the other and onto the situation our unmet needs and our expectations and our fears. So Daniel's 1 year old, and he's got diarrhea because he's got a stomach virus, an intestinal virus of some kind. He's not even very ill. He's just loose stools. And I'm watching him, and I start crying. And my wife, Ray, says, what's this about? He's just a 1 year old who's got a bit of loose stools. It's no big deal. I didn't know at that time. I'd forgotten, or I don't think I'd been told yet. But when I was about that age, under the Nazis in Hungary, I had dysentery. I was quite sick with it. Unknowingly, I was seeing myself in this 1 year old. Well, imagine what a burden that is on the 1 year old. To be seen through the eyes, projecting myself, my suffering, onto him. In the song you all very well know by Crosby, Stills and Nash, called Teach Your Children Well, or Teach Your Children, they sing, teach your children well, their father's hell did slowly go by. So there it is, I'm looking at my son through the eyes of my unconsciously remembered childhood hell. That's at 1 year of age. Now, I'm suggesting that that's true for every parent here in this family, in this room. It may not be as dramatic. And in that sense, Tolstoy may be right, that there's something unique about the way unhappiness plays out in its external manifestations. But the dynamic of parents projecting onto their kids, I see it almost universally. And of course, it's not deliberate, and it's not conscious, it's not intentional in any way at all. Nobody's to be blamed. Then Daniel's 3 years old, and it's my 35th birthday, and it's a dinner at my parents' place. My brothers are there and their spouses. Daniel's cousin, my parents. And it's time to sing happy birthday. And Daniel declares, I'm not singing happy birthday. So I say, talk about having to sing for your supper. I say, if you don't sing, there's no cake for you. Well, I'm not singing. Well, it escalated to the point where my rage dominated and ultimately destroyed the whole evening. And what was that about? I mean, why couldn't I have said, sweetheart, if you don't feel like singing, don't sing. Just have the cake and maybe you'll sing later, or maybe you won't sing. What's the big deal here? Can you see the headline in the Vancouver Sun? 3-year-old refuses to sing happy birthday, Just, how dastardly is that? So what was about that for me? Well, it was about lack of respect. and lack of being valued and lack of being celebrated, which is a childhood memory. Had nothing to do with the present moment. And ultimately, what did it have to do with? The fact that I didn't know how to love myself and celebrate myself. I demanded my 3-year-old give me what I couldn't give myself. And when he didn't, I was angry with him. I think it's totally miraculous that any of us grow up sane at all. And that eventually we figure out who we are and get to become ourselves. But these projections then and these needs that then we expect a child to need, they color so many relationships between parents and children. And of course, they carry on into adulthood. Eckhart Tolle points out in his book, The New Earth, that we all get attached to our roles. It's obvious, so one important role in life is that of the parent. In fact, for a lot of us, that may be a prime role that we identify with. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a parent, but identifying means getting your sense of identity from that role. And when you get your sense of identity from a role, then anything that goes wrong is seen as a threat to your very identity. So we need our kids to be perfect, or at least not as imperfect as they are. We need them to be behaved in a certain way, achieve certain things, look a certain way, behave certain ways, be happy, because when they're not any of those things, that threatens our identity. And then when we become adults, it's hard for us, first of all, it's hard for us to see our kids suffer and have a difficult time with things, make mistakes. Again, the headline, the Vancouver Sun, human being makes mistake, But for the parent, oh my God. So then we interfere, we don't allow them to make the mistake. Like we don't trust life to teach them. And we don't want to let go of the role. So much of what gets in the way of our relationship with our children when they're small and when they're adults has to do with pain that we haven't resolved yet, fears that we have, that we project onto our kids. We don't want them to become representatives of our worst fears. Needs we have to be validated and to be affirmed in this role that we identify with. So the question is then, how do we liberate ourselves from that? Well, the first thing is, and I'm talking to parents now, for the kids, the adult children, it's a somewhat different dynamic. And we'll try and tease that out in the workshop tomorrow or perhaps in conversation today. But for the parents, ultimately, it's the recognition that whatever they feel is not caused by their child. If I look at any of the feelings that I've experienced around my children, there's nothing new about any of them. They all go way back in my life. And so it's my responsibility to take responsibility for that at every possible moment. Now, Daniel and I had some tough words on the way to this workshop. We sorted it out. I think we've come to the point actually, when neither of us is so identified with the role that we must rigidly hold on to something. So we can actually be honest about things and get our way through our tense moments by checking in what's happening in the present moment rather than bring some more past into it. I went to a workshop once which I won't mention publicly the name of at the moment. But it was, very helpful. And the leader told a story. His name is Anurag, and he was telling a story about him and his mother. Anurag was in his 30s and every time he's visited his mother, I would love this story. His mother would say, "Anurag, are you eating enough?" And Anurag would say, "Mother, leave me alone." Next visit, "Anurag, are you eating enough?" "Mother, I told you, what I eat is my business. Now, let it go already." Next visit, "Anurag, are you eating enough?" "Mother, when are you going to let me grow up already? Do you realize in my 30s, you think trying to tell me what to eat or when to eat or how much to eat?" Next visit, "Anurag, Anurag does this workshop, this self-help, self-realization workshop, and gets all these great insights about himself and life and transformational ideas, intentions, and he's all excited to go tell his mother about his newfound sense of self and the wonderful possibilities that have just opened up in his life. So he goes to his mother, and he's about to tell her about all this wonderful stuff, and mother says, "Anurag, are you eating enough?" And Anurag says, "I just got something. This woman just wants to know if I'm eating enough." And he says, "Yes, mother, I'm eating enough." That was the end of it. So there was the mother projecting I don't know what anxiety onto her child. And there was the adult child still projecting, still coming from his childhood self, still resenting the control that he imagined, the manipulation, the worry, the anxiety. He just don't want to be responsible for any of that. So it's just so difficult to be in the present moment. And I think, and I know this to be true, that any of you are here with your parents or children, the only thing that ever gets in the way is that you're not in the present. And the other person says, "You're not seeing me, you're not hearing me." Well, of course, how can you hear and see them when you're not in the present? It's true. Neither the child sees the parent, nor does the parent see the child. And that's really the source of unhappiness, is just not being in the present and not seeing what's actually going on in front of us. So the workshop is intended to get us into the present, past all this history, past all these manifestations of old drama and unmet need. And Daniel and I had a conversation recently that you told me you appreciated. A few months ago, on the telephone, and I had said something that made him believe that he was being criticized. I forget the details actually. And he says, but it had to do with us working together, I think, not in this context, but in another context. And he said, "When are you gonna let me be your equal already?" And as Daniel tells it, and it's your telling that I'm trying to retell here, I said, "Well, I can't make you my equal." At which point, I think the way you said it, you had this sinking feeling, your heart just sank, saying, "What? I'll never make it. I'll never be his equal." But then I said, I don't know where I got the wisdom, but it came out of me. Sometimes it does. But I also can't make you not my equal. It's just not up to me. It's just not up to me. And Eckhart Tolle says, and he's a teacher I respect a lot, that on the level of form, our children can never be our equal. And my really good friend Gordon Neufeld, the psychologist with whom I gave an event just in this space a few years ago, he says, of course, there should be no equality between parents and kids. There should be a hierarchy. And the hierarchy says, I'm the one with the responsibility and the knowledge and the awareness and the experience. I'm in charge. That's just how it needs to be. So there's no question of equality, and physically or in terms of decision-making power. And that's all true. It's necessarily true. And I know, for example, that when Daniel was small, it was in the 70s, early 80s, and I had this new age idea that there should be no hierarchy between parents and kids. Those of you that are old enough will remember those sad old ideas. So I didn't want to be identified with the role of being dad. So I had him call me by my first name. And in the first 2 years of Daniel's life, I was a medical student and then an intern, very busy, often not at home. And we just, I loved him and I held him a lot and all that, but we just didn't have an ongoing interactive relationship because of where I was in my life. As a matter of fact, one famous afternoon in Montreal, when I was doing my internship, I came home and Dan is in the bathtub having a bath with his mom, and I walk in and Dan says, in no uncertain terms, "Go away, shut door, bye-bye." He wasn't shy about that. But then as I finished my internship and I began to spend more time at home, spontaneously he dropped the Gabor and he started calling me Dad. He just did that. So ultimately, parenting is not a role, as Gordon would say, it's a relationship. It's a relationship. And there's one level, as Eckhart Tolle points out, on which there's equality, which is not on the level of function or form, but on a level of being, just being in the present moment. On that level, there's no hierarchy. On that level, there's no authority. They're just being together. And really, in this society, and this is not an ideal society for parenting, and let me just say finally these words about parenting in this culture. Part of the reason it's so hard is because parents have way too much responsibility. They're way too important. They're way too important. If you look at how human beings are meant to be parented, if you look at this research on the optimal parenting environment, it's not the nuclear family. In fact, if human history, never mind human history, if human existence begins at the door on the other side of the stage and ends over at this wall, then the nuclear family appears around here. And all that time until now, we were parented in large groups. The tribe, the clan, the extended family, the community. That's the natural unit of parenting as far as human evolution is concerned. So that means that parents can make a mistake because there's a holding environment. But in our society, with the isolation that parents experience, and I won't go into my usual talk about that right now, except to say that we're far too important. We're far too important. So, ultimately, if the problem originates in the past, then the beauty of it is that the solution is not in the past, because we can never undo the past. But the solution is in the present. And that's available to us every moment. And that's what we'll be exploring for the rest of the evening, I hope, and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move into a moderated discussion, and we are extremely lucky to be joined by the esteemed Maria LeRose, who will be moderating tonight's discussion. She's a consultant at the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education and producer-moderator of the Heart Mind Conference Series. She is also an award-winning television producer and interviewer and an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Medicine at UBC. She has moderated panels featuring the Dalai Lama, Sir Ken Robertson, and other luminaries. So please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Hi. Really, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Are they amazing? I was sitting there in a fight or flight kind of position the whole time you were talking. A part of me was, the biggest part of me probably, was thinking how delicious it was what you were doing there by being so honest. And the other part of me, I couldn't figure out if it was the mother of adult children or the child of, was just having a horrible time accepting that you were being so honest about what's going on for all of us. So in the end, and actually when I woke up this morning, the first thought I had, because I knew I was going to be seeing you tonight and I was very excited about that, the first thought I had was, are they being courageous doing this? Because when people talk about, when they talk to me over the last week about what you guys are going to be doing tonight and tomorrow, I hear things like, can't you just leave well enough alone? Like just, parents do the best they can, just leave it alone. So I wonder, do you think you're courageous?
Tremendously so. Well, first of all, about leaving well enough alone. Well, I agree with you. If it's well enough, leave it alone. The problem is it well enough? And for a lot of people, it may be. There are 1 million people in the greater Vancouver area. There's only 200 of them here tonight. Maybe for all the other 999,000, etc., things are well enough. But I've never been one that ever, and maybe that's a programmed response on my part, to have thought that things were well enough. I think there's far more potential, far more possibility inherent in human beings than we usually realize. And that's true in our relationships, in our work, in our interactions, in how we conduct social affairs, and certainly if you look at the downtown east side outside of us, are things well enough? So I just don't think that way. In terms of courage, though, no, there's no courage involved. Courage involves, at least I don't think of it that way. I mean, courage implies some fear that you have to overcome. But there's no fear for me in talking about this stuff. And the reason there's no fear for me, because I truly don't take it personally. It's not about me.
How can you do that?
Sorry?
How can you not take it
Well, it's not about me. I mean, I know it's not about me because when I talk about it, people nod their heads. So it's about them. So it's about all of us as human beings. So as Eckhart points out, the ego is not personal. Whatever it is, it's not personal. So it's just, it's a dynamic. The ego is a process that we all develop mostly to defend ourselves when we were kids. So then why should I take that personally?
Well, I was watching your face when Daniel was talking, and I was thinking, yeah, he's fine with this. And so I could see that. And Daniel, for some reason, it's okay for you. You feel comfortable standing at the podium and really sharing your deepest feelings of anger at different stages. And are you afraid ever of your dad hurting your dad, or?
Am I afraid of me hurting my dad?
Yeah.
No, I've known him long enough to know. I mean, look, he always famously said, and he told us this, and he's said this publicly, that I was never, his quote is, I was never worried my kids would be angry at me. I was only worried they wouldn't be angry enough.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that he wanted us to be honest about the impacts of early experience in childhood, and that, again, he's not so attached to the role of being seen as a good parent that me reflecting on difficulties we've had and my experience of him is threatening to him. And so I don't worry about hurting him by sharing this stuff publicly. And also, obviously, we're up here by choice. No one forced us to do this. And in some ways, getting up in front of a room of 200 strangers and, chronicling my lifetime of anger against my dad is like a dream come true. So, but I do want to push back against the idea a little bit. I mean, at least it's a little different for me that somehow courage isn't involved. And I don't take that as necessarily a personal acknowledgement of something special over here with us. But I do think the path of being honest for anybody does take courage. And all that courage means is staying in the game even when it gets uncomfortable. And if it's not getting uncomfortable, I would say you're probably not doing it right. Because the truth hurts, and then it frees you. But first it pisses you off.
But at what point does it free you? Because a lot of times you see people saying their truth, and it actually doesn't free that relationship. It breaks that relationship apart. So
Right.
I think what I'm trying to understand, I think what probably a lot of people try to understand is how can you say what you're really thinking and not alienate each other?
Well, it comes in stages. I mean, we couldn't have done this debate 20 years. This debate. Interesting.
Yeah.
This event couldn't have happened any sooner than now because we weren't ready. I certainly wasn't ready.
Yeah.
There has to be the context for honesty. So I'm speaking my truth. Why don't you want to hear it? Is not a valid defense against someone's hurt feelings. Communication is a dynamic thing, and relationships are a dynamic thing.
And if I may also add,
Yeah.
you can speak the truth. You can speak your truth without being authentic. So the issue is not about truth, but about authenticity. And if I give you an example, I'm talking to somebody, and in the middle of a conversation, I say, "I think you're a bloody idiot." All right? Well, that may be the truth, but is it authentic? In other words, authentic means to be true to oneself, to the auto, the self, coming from one's true self. So when I'm judging you and venting my anger at you, am I being authentic? So authenticity is much easier to take than, now if I said instead, I notice feelings of anger and judgment in myself, that's not nearly as threatening to the relationship as if I say, I think you're a bloody idiot. That's authenticity rather than simply truth speaking.
One of the things I
Yeah.
wonder...
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, there's one more thing I wanted to say about this, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow. But you're quite right. The child is often forced into a terrible dilemma. And we force young children at age 1 into this, and age 2, and age 3, and we do so unwittingly. And the dilemma is, do I want authenticity or do I want relationship? Now, the relationship is actually essential for life. You can't live without a relationship when you're 1 year old or 3 years old. I'll say more about this tomorrow, but authenticity is also a life need, and I don't mean in any abstract spiritual sense. It's just we have to be connected to ourselves and know what we feel.
I gotta be me.
Yeah. And children, very few children are allowed the luxury of being both in relationship and being authentic. Because the authenticity, on one level, often threatens the parents.
What do you mean by that?
Well, let's say a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old throws a tantrum because she can't have another cookie. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. She shouldn't have the other cookie before dinner. But what if the parents, one of them or the other or both, grew up in a home where there was rage when they were young kids? The father was a rageaholic, or the mother was. And so they're emotionally uncomfortable around anger, any manifestation of anger. And so the child gets the message that good little kids don't get angry, which is, to put it another way, angry little girls and little kids don't get loved. And if I deliver that message often enough and with enough emotional force, the kid at some point will learn, if I want this relationship, I better give up my anger. And so now you're programmed for a lifetime to think that in order to be in a relationship, you mustn't be authentic. That's a difficult one. I think that's at the heart of so many relationships. And it's very difficult for all of us to actually know how to be authentic and be in a relationship. And yes, as your question implies, it's certainly true that if we're actually authentic, some relationships will not survive.
Yeah, yeah,
That's just true.
yeah.
But the question is, as adults, what do you want to choose? Do we still want to choose relationship over authenticity if they're not compatible? Or are we not ready to be authentic, even if it means not being in an active relationship?
We're going to be coming to you in just a little while with questions, by the way, for your questions. So I'm feeling the energy here. I'm feeling that you have questions, so we're going to be doing that. And I also want to acknowledge or just mention that Daniel's mother and Gabor's wife, Ray, is in the audience, in the front here. And I asked her if it's okay if I mention that. But do you want to take a stand up with your hand? And I asked her before we started, how are you feeling? And she said, no, good, I think she's good. And I was observing her energy throughout both of your talks. And Ray, I have to say you were entirely present. And that says something about your family, that all three of you are able to be entirely present. One of the things that you talked about is being fused, emotionally fused to each other. And I think it's so hard. You know, I remember saying to my children at one point, when you were born, I was totally responsible for you, no question, right? And for a long time I was, and you needed me, and I had to be that person. And it wasn't easy for me, actually, to be that person at the beginning. I had to really learn how to be depended on. And at about the time I learned how to be depended on, they didn't need me anymore in the same way. And that wasn't fair, right? And so I didn't think it was fair. And so that idea that we were fused in a way then, emotionally, that I knew everything about them, I thought, and then to become unfused, how do you do that and still feel the same closeness?
Well, yeah, I don't know that I would call what you describe as fusion. That's just parental responsibility, and as the child grows, parental responsibility diminishes. You know, there's kind of it's like here, and then this is the child, this is parental responsibility. As the child grows, it goes like this.
So describe fusion then.
But fusion then is if I'm attached to that role. Then I need you to stay a child.
Do you remember what I said to you at age 10 or whatever it was?
What did you say?
I don't remember how old I was, but at some point before puberty, I said to my father, Dad, I don't know sometimes where I end and you begin.
Yeah.
That's fusion.
Wasn't that yesterday?
That's what these chairs are for.
You're not on a couch.
So fusion is when a parent's needs are projected onto the child. That's what I call fusion.
So what you're describing in your case is at some point you felt some fusion. So there was something in that fusion that was working for both of you. And I think, Daniel, you really expressed that well when you said you weren't letting go. You're kind of like, Dad, get out of here, but drive me to the mall first, right? So that's a great book. And so I wonder who, in your case, how, in practical terms, who initiated this new kind of conversation, this new kind of dance?
Who wants to take the credit?
Yes, I was thinking that. You know, I don't know that there's a who. It's just, I really think that this conversation, some version of it happens in just about every family. Some version of it. Maybe not in these words. But how do we negotiate the fact that I'm an adult now, and you're an adult now, but I'm still your child and you're still my parent? I think that's a pretty universal question. I think it just automatically arises. And I think, as you say, it's how aware are we of the question?
Yeah.
I will say this. I would say it's been a matter of more urgency for me to resolve this. Why? Because I'm the one who's trying to grow the hell up. I'm trying to have a life. He already does. He's married, he's got a home, he's got a career. I've been the one struggling my way into adulthood and finding increasingly as I try to be a person, which is a difficult thing, it's more difficult than we think, that I'm tethered to these old chains. And for a while, like I said, I kind of took some sick satisfaction in blaming, the chains or blaming them for them or kind of using it as a pretext to not take risk. But ultimately, like as was mentioned, authenticity is paramount, and thus the human soul wants to flourish and be its own person. So I've definitely, the impetus has been strong in me to move things forward, and I think, but also equally for my parents. I mean, they want to be done parenting. Their youngest child is 27, almost 28. I'm 40. At a certain point, you want to enjoy your life, and you want to be done with it, I imagine. I'm not a parent yet.
I was at a parenting event, actually. It's a public evening talk at the library some years ago, and apropos what you just said, the question was raised in the audience, well, what advice would you give to adult children who are about to get married? You know, and I said, move out of your parents' home first.
Yeah. But that's a really good point, though, because people move out. You can move across the country. You can move across the world.
And take it with you. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
We were on the radio the other day, and the host read a Paulo Coelho quote all about how children move away and they grow away from their parents and they become their own people. And it was, it was a nice sentiment. But I was thinking, no, we don't. We move away and we keep our parents right here. And, then our parents show up everywhere in every relationship. And,
Yes.
Our parents don't go any fucking where.
Talk more about that. And I can tell you, your parents can die, and they can still play that large role in your body.
I
in
know.
Your life.
Well,
yeah. Not that yours are.
well, let
Not
me
the mine.
here's a quote by Elena Ferrante, who's a currently very popular Italian novelist. And interestingly enough, it's a pseudonym. Nobody knows if it's even a woman or a man, and nobody knows what they look like. But Elena Ferrante is a name that they write under. And she says in one of her books that, is it possible that our parents never die? Mm-hmm. That every child inevitably conceals them in himself? Mm-hmm. Well, it's not only possible, it's more than likely.
And so what? So that's really the question, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what? What do you gain by becoming two different and unique people in a relationship?
Well, you gain all the real perks of having parents. I'll speak for the kids. I mean, having a parents is, at least theoretically, a pretty cool thing. They're people who love you unconditionally, whether or not they always know how to express that in a way you can receive. They're there for guidance. They're there for mentorship. They connect you to your past and your family's past. They provide free babysitting when you eventually become a parent yourself, presumably. We're looking forward to that. So you get to discover all of the, I just think there's inherent pleasures. If you take all the stuff away, if you take all the pleasure away, I can look, it's still a bit hazy. I don't totally always see him for who he is. I don't know if I'm fully in the present, even at this moment. But let's say I'm sort of 85% in the present. Okay, so there's a pretty clear picture of this man who caused me on a very fundamental biological level, and that has influenced me in all kinds of ways, who I admire in all kinds of ways, who loves me no matter what I do. Who wouldn't want access to that if you could have it? Mm-hmm. The problem is that with all the stuff in the way, it sometimes seems like it's more trouble than it's worth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It seems that way.
Mm-hmm. Gabor, what does it mean to see the real Daniel? What is the difference?
Oh boy, it's such a relief, actually. It's freedom is what it is. Because there's all this self-imposed worry and guilt and regret and what if and still responsibility to make it okay, to make life okay for you, and to I gotta give the right kind of guidance, and how do I cram the guidance down his throat because he just won't bite, It's just damn difficult, And it's freedom from all that. So just freedom, and then you get to have the pleasure of what's actually in the space between us, So that's the prize. that's the prize of being in the present moment. And we're really developing that. Not that it looked that way in the car on the way here.
So just talk more about that, actually, because we don't need to know what the argument was about or the discussion, but that's a good example of how do you then navigate that kind of disagreement differently now than you would have when you were more fused and in that other kind of relationship.
Well, I think it's about how we each relate to our own upsets. So in the fused condition, I used to actually think about it. I mean, I would speak about it this way. I don't know if I told a therapist this or a friend, but I would feel like my parents and I actually literally had our hooks, our talons, like we were birds of prey, and we had our talons in each other's brains. It's like I'm over there, like perched on his brain, and he's over here with me. You know, or we're like two big mosquitoes, like sucking each other's blood. You know, like my focus used to be all entirely over there on him. How can I change him? How can I make him different? There's this way that he should be. He should be it. And if I could just make him see that he should be it and somehow convince him or persuade him or wrangle him into being that way, look, be this way. Won't it feel good? Try it. This fantasy I have that if he did that, I would get some relief from the upset I'm feeling. Rather than now, it's like, there's a bit of that. And there's like, no, why don't you, try to see it my way, like in the Beatles song, right? But then first of all, there's an awareness of the futility of that. Like, whoa, we've gone down that road many times. That never works. Like, that doesn't work 100% of the time.
How did you have that awareness? Like, how did that awareness come to you? Because that
Lots
was
of practice.
pre-learned.
No, lots of practice. I mean,
Well, lots of practice, and let's face it, we've both done our work over the years.
Yes.
You know, I mean, we not just with each other, but on ourselves, and gone to places and programs and experiences where it's a matter of getting related to reality.
Yeah.
So it wasn't purely in the context of this relationship that we would each develop that attitude. But the thing tonight was about this event. It was very simple. Daniel picks me up. I get into the car, and I say, we're scheduled to go to 9:30, and I say, we're going to finish at 9, because nobody wants to sit us. I don't want to sit on stage for 2.5 hours, and you guys don't want to watch us, And so Daniel took exception, not to the suggestion that it might be better to finish at 9 and then have spend half an hour outside and so on, but to the peremptory way in which I announced that this is the way it's going to be.
the unilateral announcement.
Sort of. So we had words over that.
But you probably would have said that if it was me who got in the car. Would
Sorry?
you? Would you have said that if you had said that if it was me who got in the car and you'd said, we're only going to 9, but I might not have heard it the same way.
It's absolutely true.
Yep.
You would not have heard it the same way. You might have heard it as a suggestion that you could even argue with.
Or I would have said, no, we're going to 9:30.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Or you might have heard it as an anxious, nervous
Yes,
man
yes,
trying to
yes,
manage and control the future
I love this. I love this. Yeah.
while hiding
Yes,
his anxiety
yes.
and nervousness.
You know what I love about that statement is this is you able to be compassionate and generous to this guy right here instead of
With a dose of
intimidated,
satire.
frightened. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. When we finally resolved it, and the thing that really got me in the car was that there seemed to be no way to have that conversation in that time. Like he just wasn't. He was picking up on something from me that he just didn't want to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hardest thing for me to sit with, the discomfort of someone saying, you know what, Daniel, I'm not having this conversation right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little anxious boy in me that's terrified the minute someone says that to me. And the experience, the interpretation I have is that I'm being shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a shame response and all that. But I felt it, I noticed it, I worked through it. And then we got here, we sat down, and I lost the thread of what I was going to say.
Well, this is just carrying on from your dad said that it triggered you, and he said that
Oh, yeah, it definitely triggered me. And it triggered me that he didn't want to engage with me even more.
Yes.
So
did you were just going to tell us maybe something about resolve? I think we were all waiting for the climax and the resolve now.
Yeah, well,
How did you get to the
we
other
sat
side?
outside, and you were talking about compassion for him, like,
yeah.
yeah. Well, first of all, I depersonalized it. I said, okay, I'm upset. He didn't do anything to me. He said blah, 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 and I had a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So first of all, take the aggrieved victim aspect of the story out of it.
That's your brain telling you.
Exactly. Mainly because it doesn't work to stay in that. I just can't resolve anything if I'm in the place that he's doing something to me. Because then it's up to him to give me my freedom, like in that song, and that's just a lost cause. So, okay, so I'm upset. What actually happened? Oh, he said some stuff. He has a preference. He wants it to end at 9. That's what he said. And maybe he's preoccupied. I mean, there's a million reasons why he could have said it with the tone he did. Mm-hmm. And the minute I realized there's more than one possibility, more than just one interpretation, then I can look at him and I can just see him. He's just Gabor. He's just grumpy Gabor. He's just being grumpy. And he's grumpy sometimes. Gabor, you know.
I was not being grumpy.
So okay,
and that's fine. And that's got nothing to do. This was the great thing. To really resolve it, it's actually not enough just for me to throw up my hands and be like, oh well, he's upset, so what? Because I did want to communicate something to him, and it was a thwarted communication. I didn't get to communicate it. It got stopped, and that, you know. So we were able to have the conversation in a new way, where I said to him, look.
So here's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
I hear you saying that we resolved it because you.
I was going to get to you in a minute. Let him finish.
I'm saying, no, Dad. But this is the thing. There is no we. I resolved it because I, and you resolved it because you.
Yeah.
You know, I resolved it for myself, and that's where the peace came from me. And you did the same. I mean, look, the fact is you came to me when we got here and said, okay, do you want to talk? That's not what you were saying in the car. So you did something shifted for you.
So Gabor, this is so, you guys are a gift, really, because you're having this conversation here that we should all be having with each other, and we're not. So what's going on for you? He gets in the car and what?
So I say, such and such, you know. I say, you know, finish at 9 o'clock. And then I get, energetically I get anger or upset flowing towards me.
Oh, sorry, because there was some recording going on. I missed it. Just tell me what was going on in your mind, on your heart when you said that.
It's not the words that Daniel spoke.
No.
If, you know, it's not a blaming thing. I'm just saying it's not how I experienced it. It's not the words. Daniel said, well, you know, Dad, that doesn't work for me. That you should just tell me, announce how it's going to go. It's a mutual event, isn't it? You know, that's not what happened.
That's pretty much what I said.
But you see, it's not, but here's what the point that you
I
made.
was angry, though. There was anger underneath.
There was anger in the space.
Yeah.
There was a lot of heat in the space.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to expose him. I just didn't want to deal with it at that moment. You know, and I want him to take responsibility for his own anger. You know, now, meanwhile, I wasn't taking responsibility for my reaction to his anger. You know, so it gets kind of complicated. But the point is, it is unraveled when each party takes responsibility for their own reaction, and not say, you made me do this.
And then gets interested in something other than being right.
Yeah.
And that's just the key move in the whole exchange, is like actually locating in me, I want something to happen out of this. I know the way it'll probably go, the way it usually goes. I know the drift. I know where the current will lead this conversation if I just do nothing and just kind of go on automatic pilot. Actually, that's not what I want here. Mm-hmm. So what do I want? Oh, I want to lead a great event with my father. I want him to know me. I want to know him. And then taking an action that's consistent with that rather than the thing I really want to say or do. Mm-hmm. It's hard.
Yeah, I think this is such a good example of that even when we've really done a great job of changing a dynamic between us, and especially a child or husband or a wife, but I think especially a child, that when you're in a heated moment and the emotional part of your brain is lit up, how quickly you go back in a flash to that habit that you've had of a relationship. Because, you know, Gabor said, I wanted him to take responsibility for. In that statement, I heard a father talking to his son, right? And that's what you were picking up on. What you demonstrated is that it's possible to do a flash of that and not get stuck there again and go home angry. That's remarkable.
Right. Or to get bogged down in shame that it happened.
Yes.
Because there were thoughts in my head being like, oh man, my siblings are right. They're completely right. This is the worst idea ever. And I thought, okay, well, maybe, so what if that's not true?
Yeah.
Can I just start something that came up for me right now?
Yeah.
I'm just so bloody proud of you right now.
Say more.
I don't want to say more. I'm just
Don't.
I'm just seeing this courageous intelligence speaking his truth, and I'm sure speaking to many hearts here, and I'm just so happy to see that.
I'm proud of you too, and I just met you. Okay, we're going to get the
Thank you.
microphones going. You're welcome,
Thank
and
you,
I mean
Bobby.
it with all my heart. We're going to get the microphones going out to the audience. Is there something special about the father and son in this, do you think? Is there something about a father and a son making peace with each other that's especially important?
As opposed to say mother and son.
Yeah, a mother
or,
and son.
or
Because
mother
I
and
think
daughter.
what happens a lot, well, I think a lot what happens when adult children grow up, this is what I observed,
Yeah.
is the son calls home from Montreal, the father answers, says, hello, I'll get your mother.
Yeah.
So it's often the relationship between the mother and so there's something that gets lost between the father and the son often, I think.
Well, and there's something archetypical about
Yeah.
battles between
Yeah.
fathers and
Yeah.
sons. But I think in any fathers and daughters, it's the same thing. I mean, it's a slightly different dynamic. Mothers and sons, mothers and daughters. So I think each pairing has its own complications and its own sort of colors. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, we've never been so into, following standard gender stereotypes.
I don't know how accurate this is, but just an observation I've had is that at a certain point between daughters and mothers in the early 20s, it gets kind of difficult. I'm a bit hesitant to say so, but I just think. So what I mean to say is, I think there are unique dynamics to each gender dyad, although the themes I think are pretty general.
So I don't want to drag other people into this mix except to ask one question, Gabor, before we go to, does it matter that you make peace with your own parents? Does that help for you to make peace with your own kids?
Here's the thing. My parents are no longer alive. I mean, I'm 72, so they've gone to their end quite some time ago. But that doesn't mean I made peace with them. And how it shows up is to my wife, is what I'm trying to say. So I project a lot of mother onto
Oh, I thought you were saying mom's possessed.
So
You project.
yesterday I buy some rye bread, but they didn't have any with caraway. See? So I got this beautiful loaf of rye bread without caraway seeds. And I'm having my lunch, I make my salad, my Greek salad, and douse it with olive oil. It's just, I'm happy as a pig in the pen. And Ray says, wouldn't be better with caraway. And how about putting some butter on your bread and then putting caraway seeds on it? And she's kind of insisting that I do this. I said, no, I don't want caraway. Well, my mother would be very controlling in in my eating, because as an infant I starved. And she just would always want to make sure. So when I could say to Ray, thanks, honey, I really don't want any caraway seeds. But no. No caraway.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I made peace with my mother. I mean, theoretically I have.
Yeah.
Theoretically I have, but the fact is, guess what? My mother shows up in my
Yes.
wife.
So by the two of you making peace with each other, you're really helping your future relationships as well with women, and just relationships in general, because we do project onto our partners, our friends, our...
You know who I'm really in this for?
Who?
My kids who aren't born yet.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And the joke about grandparents and grandkids? about why they get along so well? Because they have the same enemy.
I think we'll take it. Yes.
I just want to mention that we are filming this, and so anything that is spoken into here will be audio recorded, but your faces are not being recorded.
Daniel's coming back, by the way. No, go ahead. Just ask Gabor.
I just wanted to say
Daniel.
thanks to both of you for just being so honest. It's great. I did see you in the parking lot, and I thought, I wonder if I can get my money back. I'm just joking, but I did see you arrive. What you're talking about right now is, you know, a highly intellectual family that's learned to figure a lot of things out. And I'm wondering if you're going to touch upon it tomorrow, and maybe it doesn't matter at all. But when you're dealing with broken families or, you know, altered, they're not sort of two parents and children. Can you speak to that tomorrow, or will you speak, or can you speak to it now, or?
All right, let me ask you something, if I may, and thanks for your comment and your question. And I saw you in the parking lot, and I thought, gee, I hope she's coming to my event. So you made this comment about articulate intellectual family and all that. Did you see similarities on the emotional level to whatever your own situation may be with your own family? I'm not going to ask you what they are, but did you see similarities?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I've always said to my kids in very, you know, not probably proper parental, it's my job to screw you up and it's your job to unscrew you, you know,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
I knew that is what happened, but I didn't have the words for it. But when you have kids that have an absentee parent, and then you start projecting the absentee parent onto your children and things like that, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think we'll have opportunity tomorrow to go into people's more personal stories, as much as they want to share. And we'll offer whatever support and guidance we can. But the assumption I'm working on is that, it's like I said earlier, even though the drama may play itself out differently, the dynamics are the same. The emotional needs that are being met or not being met, the pain, disappointment that we feel, the anxieties that we have, I think those are very, very universal.
I just ask a question with a show of hands. How many of you identified with anything that's been said here today? Yeah, so that's true.
You were going to say something?
So I was just going to ask, so then is it just maybe, you talked about a veil that we put on our situations. Is it just more complicated with more complicated families then? And like I said, you don't have to get detailed. I'm just thinking, is it just about going to the present always? Just being in the present can sort of alleviate a lot of this?
Well, yes, it is as simple as that, and there's nothing simple about that. If going to the present was simple, the Banyan books wouldn't have to exist. Because they sell every flavor of get into the present. So it's the hardest thing for human beings to do. It's this paradox. It's our truest nature, and it's just not how we're wired. We're wired to survive. And how do you survive? You survive by remembering what happened in the past. And you draw conclusions from that. And you make sure that won't happen again. So we have all of this conditioning that goes against the very thing we're saying is the simple answer to everything. So there's nothing simple about it. And the method, if there is one, is to look at the ways in which, rather than trying to get free, which never works, you can't try to get free. What works, and this is universal, whatever kind of family culture you're in, is to just look honestly, take a good, hard look, an honest look at the ways in which you're currently trapped. And just see the traps for what they are. And the traps are in the ways we perceive, in the ways we interpret, in the expectations we have and in the ways that the past has. And tomorrow is designed to go deeply into that and to look at those things in detail.
Because the complexity of that is, if you're in a trap with your father, if you're in a trap, you want out of the trap. So that part's clear. A lot of people have that part of the equation. So they get out of the trap. They emotionally cut off or they physically cut off. But what you're here to say is you don't ever really cut off, that you can get out of that trap but stay in this relationship. That's the tough part.
Absolutely. I mean, those, what are those things, what's this called? When you have the finger traps, the harder you pull, the more you're in it. It's kind of like that, and so, all the striving and the trying, if we're not changing the way we're seeing things, if we're not altering our perceptions, if we're not transforming our point of view, if we, it's the trying to do the same old thing over and over again and expect a different result. Definition of insanity, blah blah blah. So yeah, it's pretty universal, and it's going to show up in a whole bunch of different ways. But we're here to talk about the universals, not the differences.
I'm sensing you're not quite complete with you.
I don't want to monopolize the time. It's just, that's totally.
Well, do you still have the mic?
No, I gave it up.
Okay, all right then, that's fine.
Are you here tomorrow?
Yeah, I
All right.
Great.
Okay.
There's another question up there. There's one waiting here.
Hello. Thank you, again, for your honesty, as everyone has mentioned, and also for your humor, because I think it makes it so accessible for everyone in the way that it's presented. And on a personal level, Daniel, I think that I can relate. All the work that I'm doing is actually for my kids, and I hope to be honest and open and humble enough to be able to have an open relationship when they start dealing with everything. I'm curious, thinking about my relationship with my mother. Obviously, both of you are very open to looking at yourselves and working on yourselves to be able to work together. But if one part of the equation is not able, because they're too vested deeply personally into it, I understand that, as you work on yourself, things shift and can open up. But how do you see that when one half of the equation is just not there?
All right, well, that's a question I think a lot of people can relate to, and we'll certainly need to work with that tomorrow. But here's what I'd quickly say about it. There are situations where the other partner is just not available. Either they are not alive anymore, or for some reason they're alienated, they're not even talking to you, or they're mentally ill, or they're so trapped in some version of their own trauma that they're just not available, they're too scared, too reluctant to look at it. So let's assume that's the case in some cases. Now, I think the reality is sometimes like that, but very often what we don't realize, we look at the other and we see all this, but we don't realize to what degree the other may be responding to us. And if we came across differently, it's entirely possible that the other would actually unconsciously but shift into a more open position. In any case, whether that's true or not, in a situation such as your question implies that I've tried to expand on, there's nothing you can do about the other person. There's just nothing. And you got to begin by accepting that. You just have to, that's how it is. And any particle of you that wishes it was otherwise is leading you astray. Because that's how it is. That's the reality. Now the question is, then where does that leave you? And where that still leaves you is with the possibility of full liberation and full freedom. So that the other person doesn't have to change in any way at all, and you can still be totally free. Now, being free doesn't necessarily mean pain-free. In fact, so much of what we do to try and interact with the other and change the other and convince the other and cajole the other is our attempt not to feel pain. Because if you cooperate, then I don't have to feel the pain. So it has to begin with a commitment to freedom, and that does not mean that you'll be pain-free. So it means sometimes accepting, yeah, this hurts, but that's how it is. And if that's the reality, then how can I work with the reality, not with my fantasies, not with what I would wish? Again, I'm saying that there's every possibility, or a great possibility, that should partner A in the dyad shift, partner B will shift too. But that should not be the motive. That should not be the intention, that they should shift. It's, how do I liberate myself? And then let's see what that'll bring to the relationship. And one way or the other, I can be free.
And often the source of that pain is these fantasies we've had for so long. These sort of pleasant dreams where we have a nice family meal and everyone gets along, and it, you know, like I've got these. You know, I've imagined scenarios, conversations I couldn't wait to have with my parents long before I was ever married, or ever qualified to be married. Emotionally, I would dream of having a wedding, not so that I could profess and commit my love to one person for the rest of my life, but so that my parents could make glowing speeches about me in front of a room of people. Well, what was that? That was a fantasy. It was a fantasy that someday I would get what was coming to me. Now that reflects something about my childhood, or at least about my experience of my childhood, that you know, I was deprived of a certain something. Whether or not I actually was isn't as important as recognizing that that was my experience. And now I'm carrying around this like Jones for acknowledgement and being seen by my parents. And so I do all kinds of things that I'm not aware I'm doing to try and get that every time I talk to them, every time I email them for anything. In every communication, I'm communicating that unmet childhood need that I'm hoping someday they'll give to me. Now, how does an adult parent respond to unspoken requests from an adult who's basically talking from being their childhood self? Well, they may push away a little bit, you know. I'm not saying that's the case in your case, but giving up these fantasies and accept, like my father said, accepting that what happened happened and that this person is the way person is now, and then getting really interested in my own freedom at all costs. You know, and yes, I value this person, and yes, I want a relationship with them. But treating it not like it's 50-50, but like it's 100-100. And the only 100 I can control is mine.
So that idea that one person can shift in such a strong dynamic is such a compelling idea, but it's so difficult to shift when there's, especially when you're the one who, as you've said earlier, Daniel, has an urgency. If you're the young person who feels an urgency to shift because you want to get on with your life, and the other person who's there doesn't feel the same urgency, they feel some fear maybe, right?
But that's fine. So then I'll shift in the ways I need to, given who they actually are, not who I wish they were.
So that takes work.
Well, it takes work. And the work is internal.
Yeah.
The work is not working over there with them, but okay, I didn't like that response I got from them. That conversation did not go the way you know, you've seen A Fish Called Wanda, right?
Yes.
You know, how Kevin Kline's character discharges upset. He says, disappointed.
Yes.
He just says it out loud, you know, he just admits it. And that's, you know, there's a lot of that. You just admit, well, disappointed, but I'm the one who's disappointed.
Yes.
That wasn't disappointing objectively. There's no disappointing out there.
Yes.
The disappointment is over here with me. Okay, what's that about? I hoped something would happen. Why? Well, because if it happened, it would mean this. Okay, well, really, would it? And having the, I mean, this is, I don't know if it's courage or just being rigorous with myself. But again, like, I see it as a matter of kind of life or death. Not literal life or death, but like either being enlivened or being deadened. So yeah, I'm motivated to ask these critical questions of myself. Is it really true that my father needs to show up in this or this way for me to feel, you know, X, Y, Z?
So, all right, that's fine.
What?
I've heard that before.
Well, it's okay. We'll talk about it later.
Oh, Gabor, that's a dirty pool.
No, it has to.
Two minutes for vague booking.
It has to do with the dynamics of the event, not the content of what you said.
Was I talking for too long?
I think you were talking for too long.
You know,
Okay.
I just wanted to say one thing about that. One of the best piece of advice I've ever got, just picking up on what you're not about you talking too long.
No, it's
I
just,
didn't perceive it that way. But
Did you have some discomfort when I was speaking, Father?
I did.
Okay, well, that's a more accurate statement.
Okay, fair enough. It's only this. Somebody asked a question.
No, you had discomfort when I was speaking.
I did. I have some discomfort because I want to make sure that it goes well for the audience.
So do I.
Yeah, I know you do. So my sense is that when somebody asks a question, just answer the question. Don't start riffing about other stuff.
Father, I learned how to riff from you.
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah. I so want to take a straw poll right now, but I won't.
well,
What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
so just as a little commercial break before we move on to the next. One of the things that what Daniel said is, I think that's really important here, is that you were saying about shifting
Yeah.
without both parties shifting at the same time. What you were describing was really observing and commenting rather than jumping in and trying to change the other person. So you were in, and one of the best pieces of advice I ever got when I was starting to get to the age where I really wanted to differentiate from my parents was to go, when I went home for Christmas that year, don't do anything, just observe the dynamics. And I had to do that 3 Christmases in a row because I didn't go home that often. And while I was doing that, I was coming back and talking to someone and reflecting on what I was seeing and and starting to think about and rehearse how I might handle that. And so that kind of slow pace gave my parents a break too, so that I didn't suddenly arrive home, actualized one Christmas and dump it all on them about how I wanted them to change. So that taking the time and observing, I think that's what I heard in what you were saying, and thinking, wow, that didn't go well. But to be generous with our parents as well.
Sure. And yeah, that it takes discipline
Yeah.
to do nothing.
And support for you.
Yep.
Yeah. We have another question.
Okay, now I'm really nervous because I've been waiting for so long, but I'm learning so much. Thank you so much. And I come from a family of 8. I'm one of the youngest. I have 7 siblings. So I have regular parents, and then I have at least 3 other parents in my family. So I've been digging myself out of that for the last at least 10 years with intense work. And one of the things I am doing is going to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, support groups. I've never heard you talk about that in any other way, but sometime I'd like to hear you talk about that. But the question I have right now is, this is the dynamic I get. This is my family. This was today. Up until a few years ago, we all lived within a couple of miles of each other in Vancouver. So it was kind of crazy. So this is it. This is right here.
So it's not just us.
No, it's not just you.
Great.
At all. So my question is, so in the parking lot, what I didn't hear, and maybe you don't want to answer, what I didn't hear was how you came to, this is what I never hear, right? When my siblings boss me around and have arguments and do crazy stuff or whatever, I'm like desperate to make it up. Oh my God, I want to make it better. I'm desperate, right? And I know that's my shit. But I don't often hear the others where it started. Like, it's not my dad that I have the thing with, it's my siblings. So I don't know where it started that you came in and decided to say it in that way at 9 o'clock. Like, were you anxious to start? Like, I didn't hear that part. Or maybe you never talked about it. I'm talking to Gabor right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, did you get the question after all that long?
Well, so you were in the parking lot.
No.
Just hold the workshop in the
I didn't
parking
hear
lot.
when you guys were talking it out, the parking lot conversation,
We
or
didn't.
whatever the car drive, or whatever the
car,
thing was.
I see it. Yeah.
You didn't. I didn't hear you say. I heard what you said, Daniel, about where you were coming from. You felt like the kid, blah blah blah. But I didn't hear how you started it. At
It's
9
your
o'clock.
motivation. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes, that's what I didn't hear.
all right. So isn't that something? It's 9 o'clock and we're not finished.
I'm sorry, that's all the time we have tonight.
So I get an idea in my head that it's 2.5 hours is too long for people, and so I just get in the car and I just announce that this is truth, this is reality. My version of how it is how it is. I just make that assumption. Now, 99% of the time, that's true. My version of reality is reality. As any of my family will tell you. But it's a narcissistic assumption. I don't begin with, here's what I'm thinking, what are you thinking? And never mind, here's what I'm thinking, what will the Hollyhock people think who are organizing the event? So it begins with that. It begins with a kind of, it does begin with an assumption on my part that I get to define reality. That's true, that's how it began. Is that your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
So now I'm totally humiliated. Are you happy? Yeah.
Over here. Is that on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd just like to know where you are.
I'm here. Hello.
Right there.
Over here.
Turn to your left,
Okay,
to your
thank you.
left.
Dad,
to your
you're
left.
looking in the totally wrong direction.
Okay, yeah. All right. Okay.
Thank you both for being so open. Thank you, Maria, for being terrific as ever.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Ram Dass who said,
Yeah.
go live with your parents for a week and see how enlightened you are.
Yeah. That's right.
I just wondered if you had anything to say about how you manage the tension between being enlightened and aware, and it makes me think of the caricature of incredibly enlightened parents and the kids are running amok around them, and how you manage the tension between being enlightened and not being misperceived as indifferent or emotionally aloof.
It's very easy.
that's good.
Neither of us is remotely enlightened.
Yeah. That's
So it's a very easy balance to strike, actually.
what on earth gave you the impression either that we're enlightened or that we think we are?
Well,
And I'll tell you something.
Or actually, you know what? Let me ask you a different question. What do you mean by enlightened? So what do you mean by it? Because you actually asked a serious question.
Yes.
And I don't want to respond with sort of a glib response. So what do you mean by enlightened, and what can we really tell you?
I think what I mean by enlightened is acknowledging...
And would you mind just speaking up a little bit?
Sorry.
It's okay.
I think by being enlightened, I mean acknowledging sameness. Because really, everything that you say,
Yeah.
I see as a reflection of my own thoughts, feelings, experiences. So, it's what you spoke about earlier, Daniel, the struggle between being hardwired to survive versus just being present and managing that tension constantly. That's what I mean by being enlightened.
Well, I'll just speak briefly to my experience of this, and I'll turn it over. I grew up with two parents, and particularly one, who talked a real good enlightenment game.
that's what you meant, yeah.
All right, they talked a lot about enlightenment. There was a lot of enlightenment talk in my house. People went to a lot of enlightenment intensives. People read a lot of books on enlightenment. There might as well have been a bar graph on the wall about how close to enlightened are we all. Oh, now we're looking. That has zilch to do with my experience of anything like peace, spaciousness, freedom, or liberation, or lightness in my home. And in fact, it was sometimes a very striking contrast that the words and the being didn't match. When the being and the words match, or when the being is aligned, there's no misperception of anything. Because enlightenment in the sense of seeing the sameness of everything, I think your question is actually more general in terms of the search for enlightenment, but it's not the same as indifference. Indifference is sort of one of these pitfalls that pseudo-enlightened people get into, right? But from the child's point of view, the words don't matter. You can feel it when your parents are aligned with your energy and aligned with the energy of life, and when they're not. And that's all that matters to a kid.
As for me, I've certainly I've not had what I would call an enlightenment experience. The word enlightenment really has two meanings. There's the Western intellectual sense. So we talk about enlightenment, what began to happen in Europe in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century, where all of a sudden people broke out of the intellectual straitjacket of religion, and began to ask questions. And they called that the Enlightenment. And it was a very important process in human history, but it was largely an intellectual one. And then there's enlightenment in a more spiritual sense of experiencing reality the way it is in the present moment. I don't claim to have had that experience. What has been very frustrating for my family, and I'm committed that it should not continue to be the experience, is that I would talk about enlightenment and as a goal and an intention, or as at least as an ideal, never claiming to have achieved it. And I don't want to say this, but I mean, I get these emails and accolades and just, people saying all these incredible things about what my work has meant in their lives. You couldn't make this stuff up. But I've not walked that walk. I could teach it to a certain degree and quite successfully, actually. But I've not, intermittently I've put in the practice, but not consistently. And so invariably, there'd be a huge gap between what I could teach and understand intellectually and what I was living. And I think maybe that's what your question is pointing towards. And that's been true for me. I can truthfully say now, that's no longer the case. I'm actually, not that I've achieved enlightenment, and in any case, I'm not sure that, like Eckhart would say, that those experiences, for a lot of people are, for some people they're events, but for most people it's a process. And so, yeah, I'm somewhere in that process, I do believe. But I can actually claim now with authenticity that I'm committed. There should not be that gap, that I do everything to reduce the gap between the public and what I can say and how I live my life. That's quite recent. That's quite recent for me. We'll see how that plays out over time.
Yes, we will.
But there's been that. What did you say?
I said, yes, we will.
Better late than never.
But the disconnect that you point to, it's been very real in my life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just get a total show of hands of people who have questions? Just so
There's
I can
one right
get a
behind
sense?
you.
Well, I've been getting a lot of people tagging me while we're talking, and I just want to get an overall sense so I'm not leaving too many people out. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's been incredible. And Daniel, I have learned so much from you. Thank you. I've always really admired your father, and I admire you as much. So
Thank you. You didn't want to hear any less from me? Anything I could have left out?
there was a line that you said you said, I want him to know me. I want to know him. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to check in with you and hear, do you feel that you are making progress this evening?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, maybe you truly never see your father until he's undermining you in front of a room of 200 people. That's totally a story and an interpretation. It's not what he was doing. I don't know about tonight, but certainly, yeah, before, I mean, I think with every passing week, with every passing interaction, we're making that progress. I mean, to me, I'm starting to gauge the success of this, not in terms of like, is it always great, but how frequently do we have these moments where we just shut the fuck up and enjoy each other? A lot more than we used to. To what extent can I make those moments happen? How long does it take from the moment I realize, hey, I'd like to have this happen, and then like how peacefully can I get to that moment where he and I, just before the event, we're just sitting, you know, on the windowsill out there, and I was asking him to take a look at me and tell me what he saw. And he said, well, let me think about it. I said, well, the answer's not in there. It's out here. And I saw a man trying his best to give his son what his son was asking for, you know? And it was tender and awkward and vulnerable, which are difficult ways for him to be. His persona is none of those things, at least with me, you know. And it's difficult for me to be that way with him. I'm used to being kind of either mischievous and subversive and witty or angry, you know. So just how often do we have these moments of hello again, and hello again, and hello again? It's always different. How fresh is it? How much can my dad surprise me, you know? So, and they happen when they happen. It's kind of like grace, you know? You can't force it, but you can cooperate with it if you learn to work with it. So, yeah, that's my, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I just want to just pick up on that word vulnerable for a minute, because I wonder, part of my question about this change in dynamics, this transformation, is in every transformation you gain something and you lose something. And things don't stay the same for as long as they did if it wasn't working for you in some way. So when I think about what it's like to see somebody who you've resented for being strong, but who's always been strong, being vulnerable, not particularly tonight, but in the beginning maybe of this transformation, were there losses for you in that, giving up that dad who...
Not really. No, it's just such a relief. I mean, like, any losses that my mind might have tracked is just totally over, I think, it's just completely overwhelmed by the waves of bodily relief that come from getting to just interact with my father in a new way. Like, it's just so inherently rewarding. Like, you know, there must be reward chemicals that are released or something. I don't know. He knows more about physiology than I do.
Do you know that quote from the Course in Miracles about nothing real can be? You know?
Yeah, it's the
How does
first.
it go?
Nothing real can be threatened.
Nothing unreal exists therein lies.
Right. Also, I'll just repeat it for everyone here. Is nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God.
So therefore, any losses, they're not real.
Doesn't mean you don't feel them.
Oh yeah, that may be true.
But I feel them to the extent that my mind is still deriving some pleasure, benefit, or payoff from them. And then I can take a look at that. That's my mind,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
In terms of what I feel in my body, it's primarily just relief and pleasure and space, and I can experience myself flourishing. We did a session with a family constellation therapist a few months ago, which is a very powerful mode of therapy for you know, close relationships. And she was sort of reading both our energies and kind of translating one to the other, because literally we sort of didn't have the language to express things to each other. I couldn't make myself understood to him in a way where he fully got it.
And you get this. I make my living through my words. I write books, and Daniel is a lyricist.
Yeah,
And we didn't have the language. Can you get that?
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
very
that's
good.
right. So, because it's not in the words. It's not in the words. And she got it instantly from me. She got what I was longing for, and she said, Gabor, your son is a wild stallion in the paddock who wants to run free. You have to keep the gate open for him, you know? And I felt, not that it's my dad's job to open the paddock door, like, you know what I'm saying? But like,
You didn't say that.
but I experienced this actual release, this sort of freedom. So it's visceral, is what I'm saying. It's felt. It's much more than just.
It's more rewarding.
It's
than
more
any
rewarding
loss.
than any loss.
Wow.
listen, you guys, I want to tell you the story. It's not apropos anything. I just want to tell you the story of Dan and my relationship. I've told it before publicly, but most of you probably have not heard it. So the last time Maria and I did an event here in this space, it was with my friend and co-writer Gordon Neufeld, who's just the most brilliant developmental psychologist in the world, which is, I'm being modest when I say so, because he is. Anyway, so Gordon and I had written this book together called Hold On to Your Kids, based on Gordon's ideas on certain aspects of parent-child and peer relationships. I'm not going to go into the details, but the evening was around parenting. And so Gordon and I had written this book. So Hold On to Your Kids came out when Diane was 28 years old, and her sister was 14 years younger?
13 years younger.
13 years younger, so sister was 15 years old. And Hannah and I had an incident where she was not doing her homework all weekend, and I came downstairs Sunday evening. I got really upset that she hadn't done her homework, and I tried to force her to turn the TV off. And she finally said, well, if you're not letting me watch TV here, I'm going to my grandparents. And I said, no, you're not. You're staying home and doing your homework. And she said, are you saying you're not letting me go to my grandparents? And I said, yeah. She said, then I'm calling 911. And so I said, you're calling 911 here, 911. Now you tell the cops that your father doesn't let you watch television when you haven't done your homework. I didn't realize the phone was on.
Oh!
And 5 minutes later, there's a phone call. Sir, this is the Vancouver police. There's somebody there. Dial 911. I said, yeah, officer, that was me. What happened? So I explained what happened. She said, well, how's your daughter? She's fine, but if you need to come over and check, by all means, yes, sir, we'll have to do that because that's our policy when somebody dials 911. So 3 minutes later, cops show up, and 4 minutes later, Dan shows up home from work. No, actually, no. Dan shows up first, and I said to him, the cops are coming. And
And I said, finally.
And Hannah goes upstairs with the policewoman to get debriefed about this terrible thing that happened. And I go to the kitchen with the policeman, where I tell him the story, and he takes notes. And then my brilliant 28-year-old son finally pipes up and says, officer, I can tell you exactly what happened here. And the cop says, what? And Daniel says, these two people really know how to trigger each other. And the policeman says, I get that. And furthermore, says my brilliant 28-year-old son, this man over here writes best-selling books on how to parent. So we've been at it for a while. Is what I'm trying to say.
I have no memory of that.
You have no memory of
Well,
that?
at least not of saying that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great story.
Oh, yeah.
I think we have time for another question.
Hello. Thank you for the theme. I appreciate fresh starts. Sounds hopeful and optimistic, and so I'm interested in hearing what some of the bridges for starting that. It implies to me new beginnings. So maybe some suggestions what I can look forward to learning about how to initiate those new conversations, how to bridge old behaviors and habits and expectations. Maria, thank you. I heard an example of simply observing and going slow. Maybe there's some other ideas for me to be watching for.
And just so I know, are you coming tomorrow?
Yes.
Great, okay. I mean, short answer for me is just don't believe everything you think. In fact, don't believe anything you think.
That's very good.
Because I don't know about a bridge to the relationship, but the bridge to nowhere is your own current interpretation of the situation. Just take that as a given. And that's not a slight, because I'm saying that to every single one of you and to myself and him. And like, it's just a condition, actually, I think, of being human beings, that we get locked in a particular way of seeing something. And the way of seeing, we don't see our way of seeing it, but the way of seeing it is completely determinate in both what we see and how we respond to it, react to it, really. So the bridge starts with me looking over here at, okay, what am I believing about this versus what's actually true? And tomorrow is all about that, So that's the best place I know to start.
It is a will, it does obviously I'm not going to give a detailed answer, and part of it is actually in the process. It's not like we'll be didactically teaching the whole day. It's not what it's about. It's not how I work. It's not how Daniel works. So it'll be an interactive process. But the essence of it really, not just in this topic, but in any topic, what it has to do with our relationship to any aspect of the world, is, are we willing to see it differently? Or are we committed to seeing it the way we've always seen it? And if we're committed to seeing the way we've always seen it, for sure there's no way out. And if there's a willingness to see it differently, not knowing what that might be, but just the willingness, then there's all kinds of possibility. And really it's all about learning to recognize how we see it now, and learning to recognize that there's other possibilities.
Yeah, I wonder if I could humbly submit from my own experience another step in there, which is seeing the way it is now, seeing those other possibilities, and asking myself, what would I lose if I went the other way?
That's right.
So, you know, if I have to actually accept that it's that my mother is not a blah, 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 or my father is not a... My identity is carved by thinking I'm this person, they're this person.
That's right.
So for me, one of the big steps was asking myself, what would I lose by crossing that bridge into me just accepting those parents generously and having curiosity about them.
And then being honest about the answer, because it may not be the case that I ask myself, well, really, what do I have to lose? I should just give it up. Okay, I'm going to no. Sometimes the identity is not ready to give it up yet.
That's right.
I want to suffer a little bit more.
That's why it takes
I want to
time.
fight a little bit more. And then the best thing to do is just admit that. You know what? I'm not ready to give up making you wrong yet. I'm going to choose the way it is now until it gets more intolerable. It's a valid choice. At least I'm choosing it.
Well, I am happy to say that if you thought we were supposed to end at 9:30 and you thought we were supposed to end at 9, we're about halfway.
Actually, we're closer to 9:30.
And
I didn't think we should end at 9:30. I thought we should end whenever Maria wants to end.
thank you. Well, what I wanted to say is I think, Gabor, that you underestimate how much people in this audience wanted to be a part of this conversation. Am I right? And I understand that if you are interested after tonight in signing up for the event tomorrow and you haven't signed up already, you can. But I know you just applauded, but I'd like for us once again just to thank Daniel and Gabor for what they've offered us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
I also wanted to thank Maria
Thank
here
you.
for providing that clarity and structure.